Hey guys, welcome to Chapter 10, the Geography of Religion. So, um, let's dive right into this chapter. The book divides religion into three broad types, and the first one would be the animist religion, and these are the religions of the hunter-gatherers. And this religion is very much tied with the idea of the sacred space worldview that we talked about a few chapters back. The second type are the religions of Asia, and here the main classifying thing is not so much the type of religion, but the fact they all basically started in Asia. And the last grouping are the monotheists, the religions that primarily believe in one main deity, like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Now, one thing a religion has, it's kind of interesting, is that all religions have a certain trait, and one of them is the core of believers. In other words, there are a certain amount of people that all share a similar belief, and that's what makes them all part of the same religion. There may be some variations among the group, but for the most part, there's this core, a large number of people. If nobody believed in a religion, then the religion really wouldn't be there. We would know about it. And the second thing is global diffusion. Almost all religions that we can talk about in this class have moved through time and space. People move, and so do their religions. So let's start with the animist tradition, the religion of the hunters and gatherers, this idea that nature and space are connected and sacred, right? And it's kind of a misconception that these are inherently better types of worldviews for the environment, that they're green. And in fact, that idea has been stolen in a sense with the modern environmental movement. I'm going to show you a video here in a little bit. Not exactly true. The main reason that we don't see animists and hunter-gatherers really overusing the environment is, as we stated before, they're usually such a small presence on the ground, they don't leave a big enough mark. That's the main reason. There were a tribe of Native Americans in Canada, the book talks about, that had came in contact with Europeans, and this was the 1500s, 1600s. There was a big demand for beaver fur, for the fur of beavers, for the pelt, and the Europeans traded a lot of value for these. So the Native Americans focused their efforts on hunting and killing beavers to the point where it basically was wiped out in eastern Canada in about 50 years. So they can definitely have a negative effect. Now, the modern environmental movement. Here's a cart. Let me show you this, and bear with the screen changes here. Um, but this video right here is what I want to show you. If you want to watch this on your own, I know that it might not have been the best quality. In the other regular PowerPoint, there's a live link, or just type in "Keep America Beautiful" commercial with Iron Eyes Cody. Or I just typed in "crying Native American" because you noticed he was crying, didn't you? Right? He's looking at all the environmental degradation that we're doing, and watch his face right here, the tear. And this icon, this image, right, the Native American, the proud face, but the tear, this kind of became a symbol of the early 70s environmental movement, right? That the Native Americans were the stewards of this country and that we've taken it away from them. And so they kind of are reappropriating this. This gentleman, by the way, was an Italian American, was not Native American, was cast for this role, and actually found work playing Native Americans for the rest of his acting career. So Anyway, if you want to go back to that video, that blue right here, that's a live link in the regular PowerPoint. But the religious aspects of the um, animist tradition there have been reincorporated and taken by today's modern ecology. Here's a great example. This was last year, and this was in New Zealand. Um, but this is the Voices of the Sacred Earth Festival. And for only $195, you can register. You get cultural workshops, music, dance, food trucks, sweat lodges, indigenous ceremonies. Oh, and there's a kid zone. So look at all the, kind of Native American iconography, kind of evoking that kind of hunter-gatherer tribe for something that is very much about profit. I mean, food trucks don't really say Native American to me. Another example from your book are the Huichol Indians of western Mexico. They live in the area of western, near the Pacific Ocean. And they come from a tradition, they were hunters and gatherers. They did undergo the Columbian encounter, so they're nominally Christian, but they still practice many of their native beliefs. And part of that is that animist belief that their landscape, where they live, is sacred. This is all one holy area, right? And so the issue with this is there's been this desire to mine silver. Uh, Geologists have said there's a lot of silver in those mountains, but to mine it could be very environmentally devastating. To the Huichol Indians, this is sacred land, so this would be the same thing as putting an oil well in the middle of the Vatican City in Rome, or putting a pipeline through Mecca. So to them, that would be very disrespectful as we would see it, and a lot of controversy about this. But this idea of the environment as commodity, it's how you view it. And to these Indians, the environment is a religious commodity, not to be exploited for profit. Now, the religions of Asia are broken down basically because they originate in Asia, and there's two main types. The Indic region of northern India is right here, which is basically the Ganges River plain in India, and it's been a crossroads for trade, for travel, for agriculture, for trade for thousands of years. Some of the earliest civilizations arise here, okay? And four religions all have their starts here: Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Jainism, okay? The other main religions of Asia would be Shinto and Confucianism. And Shinto is a religion that is based in Japan. And Confucianism, not so much a religion as a cultural set of beliefs, which I'll talk about the difference, arises in China. Okay. Now, these religions, though, have spread throughout the world. There are Hindus, there are Buddhists all over the world, and even if they're not practicing anymore, a lot of the beliefs have gone around the world. Buddhist beliefs, the idea of meditation, right? And a lot of changes. So the idea of yoga, most people today in the United States think of yoga as an exercise or a fitness regime. But yoga actually originates as a part of meditation by Hindu monks. And achieving these poses was an act of religious devotion. So, been all around the world. And let's talk about Hinduism. There are over 1 billion Hindus. It's the primary religion of India. Okay, and it's one of the oldest religions. Its traditions go back before that of Christianity or Islam. And it is interesting. It's monotheistic, which means it believes in many gods, or one god, I'm sorry, mono, and polytheistic, which means that it also believes in one. And so to not get too deep into theology, there are aspects of Hinduism where there are many different gods, and there's other aspects of Hinduism that see all those gods as just part of the one larger god. So it's kind of unique that way. What's also interesting about Hinduism, there's not one main book. In Christianity, you have the Bible. In Islam, you have the Quran, one foundational text that basically is the book. But in Hinduism, there's many stories, many books, many sagas. And so, because there's many different books and different stories, it gives it more plasticity. In other words, it can be more flexible in how you believe it and how you interpret it. Hinduism places a big focus on place, festivals in different places, and rituals. The idea of yoga, a ritual, it is a ritual devotion to spirituality. The festivals that happen at certain times, okay, involve worship and pilgrimage to specific sites. There's also a very distinct social aspect of it. Now, social aspect of Hinduism was much more fluid until large areas of India became part of the British Empire. And in response to this, a lot of Hinduism was actually formally codified to kind of maintain it in the face of colonialism. And one of the things that happens is the caste system. So in Hindu belief, when you die, you are reincarnated, and how you lived in this life affects where you are in the next life. But where you are when you are born in this life and who you are and who you are born to sets your position, and you are part of a caste. So if you are the son of the priests and warriors, then you are a priest and warrior class, the Brahmins, and you will always interact with, deal with, and only marry within your caste. If you are the people that are the farmers, that's the farmer caste. And so it's a social system that you basically stay your place. And if you lead a good life, maybe you reincarnate into the higher caste. Unfortunately, it's hierarchical. There's levels. And if you are in the bottom caste, I'm trying to get my hand to work here, right in the thing, the untouchables, these are the people that do the dirtiest work. They handle the dead bodies. They are the poorest of the poor. And you can't get out of that caste. You can't marry up. You have to marry someone in that caste. You have to live in a certain part. So you are basically oppressed. Okay? Now, in India, when India became independent in 1948, when they wrote their constitution, they definitely wanted to move away from that. And so they actually outlawed the caste system. It was illegal to discriminate based on the caste system. And India is a secular society. It does not it doesn't favor one religion over another, just like we don't here supposedly, right? So one of the things Hinduism has done is because in India there are many different religions. A lot of politicians have actually used Hinduism as an identity to build a nationalist politics. In other words, to be a good Indian, you must be Hindu, and to be Hindu, you must be Indian. And I think the best analogy you can hear here is, I mean, many of you probably heard that people say the United States is a Christian nation, and there's kind of this unspoken belief that most people in this country are Christian. And that's merging a religious identity with a nationalist politics. And right now, there's a big movement in India where Hinduism is emerging, and the leaders of India are actually using that kind of as a marker. Buddhism is another major religion, and actually Buddhism begins by a guy named Buddha. That was his name. He was actually a Hindu, and he was a noble, and he was a different view of religion. And it's not so much a religion. People don't worship Buddha, but he practiced and preached a set of values that was different from Hinduism. He did not believe in the caste system. He also believed that reincarnation was not a good thing, but the idea was to lead a good enough life that you did not have to reincarnate anymore. So Buddhism begins in India and spreads all across India, Southeast Asia, which is Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and all the way into China. And again, here there's less reliance on caste. Okay, fundamental beliefs are that, again, what we talked about. But over time, there's been two forms. They kind of split, the Mahayana and the Theravada. I'm not going to ask you any questions on an exam about the difference between the two, but know they're there. But one of the ways that Buddhism reacted to the British colonialism of India was this idea of meditation. Before European colonialism, meditation was something that was only primarily done by Buddhist monks. It was a very specific form of religious devotion. But to keep their Buddhist identity, you started seeing meditation in response to that. People would meditate to basically proclaim their Buddhism as a way to kind of maintain their identity. There are other religions. There's many other religions actually in Asia. Those are the two largest ones, but there's also a religion like Sikhism, which is a large part of northern India and Pakistan, which is actually a mixture of Hindu and Muslim qualities. Jainism is a very ancient religion and is extremely pacifist. A devout Jainist will not eat meat. They are vegan and will actually wear a veil over their face so they don't accidentally inhale an insect and sweep the ground in front of them so they don't kill anything. In East Asia, you have Shinto. And Shintoism is a mixture of ancestor worship and at one point the Emperor of Japan was considered the god of Shintoism, not so much anymore. And then Confucianism. Now Confucianism, it's considered a religion, but it's more of a philosophy. It's a way of living life. In Confucianism, the philosophy stresses loyalty to the family, loyalty to the group, the role of obeying the state, and it has shaped Chinese cultures for thousands of years. You don't pray to Confucius. He was just a philosopher. He was not a god. So it shares that aspect in that it is a philosophy in how you live, but it isn't a worshipful religion. Now we move on to the last part, the monotheistic religions, or another term they call them is the Abrahamic religions. Monotheistic religions believe in one deity, and Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all begin with this Abrahamic religion group. And if you in the Bible and in the Jewish book of the Torah and in the Muslim Quran, Abraham is a person who lives in ancient Babylon, ancient Sumerian, one of the first areas to have cities, and he hears the voice of God, and God tells him to move to what is currently Israel and Palestine today, and says, "Go there, and I will make you the father of a nation." And Abraham moves with his family, and all three religions trace their ancestry back to Abraham. So the area that happens, we call it the Semitic region. That is basically where Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, all of that area, Egypt, and three major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all arise there from this Abrahamic tradition. Okay. Another term often used is people of the book. All three of these religions also share a foundational religious text. The center of the Christian religion, the Bible. In Islam, you have the Quran, and in Judaism, you have the Torah, the Word of God as written in a book. So it's right there in front of you, and you have this book. Monotheistic means one deity. Okay, and many of these religions share similar stories and myths. So Noah is a figure in all three religions. Noah and the ark, just in different ways. And it's interesting. They may have similar characters, but oftentimes they interpret them many different ways. And a good example is Jesus. So in Judaism, Jesus is seen as a teacher. The term is rabbi. He was a teacher. He was trying to teach people about God. But he was not seen as the Son of God. Where in Christianity views Jesus as a deity, the Son of God. In Islam, Jesus is mentioned as one of the prophets in a tradition of people who are giving God's word to the people, but he's not divine. So one person, but three different interpretations. So Judaism, let's start with Judaism. Judaism is the oldest of the three. In fact, you could say that the other three kind of begin and branch off of Judaism, but it was a monotheistic religion, one of the first in the world that there was one God, but not universalizing. And what that means is Judaism was the religion of the Hebrew people, but it didn't seek to gain converts. People didn't go out and try to preach Judaism to convert the masses. This was basically the religion of the Hebrew people. Judaism and Hebrews were very much similar. Okay, and it begins with early Mesopotamian urbanists. So Abraham was a person who lived in the city, I believe it was Ur, one of the first cities in the world in what is today Iraq. And that society informs how Judaism evolved, which was a literate society. They had written words, one of the first literate societies. Okay? And just like in the Mesopotamian culture, that things happened in nature for a reason, and that reason was God testing people. So a good example is the idea of Noah and the flood. So in ancient Mesopotamian culture, there was the story of Gilgamesh, who was facing a flood, and that God warned him, and he saved the people by building a boat, which is very similar to the story of Noah. And in the Jewish and Christian religions, Noah was this person that was told by God to build a boat because God was going to bring a flood to kill off the rest of wicked humanity. And so again, nature, the idea of the flood, things in nature happen for a reason, God testing their faith. And this religion is used to explain all the disasters that they could not explain, like floods and famines. They didn't have the science back then to understand why is it dry this year? Why is this river flooding? Okay? Now, later on, Judaism was dispersed. Around the year 100 AD, the area that is now Israel and Palestine was part of the Roman Empire. And the Hebrew people did not want to be part of the Roman Empire. They had a revolution and they lost. And so the Romans punished them by saying you have to leave. They kicked everybody out. They dispersed throughout the Middle East, moved on to Europe and the New World, and facing persecution have been all over and moved for many years. Many different types of discrimination and conflict. During the Middle Ages, uh, England in the year 1200 kicked them all out. Um, this eventually builds up to where we have the Holocaust, and that was in World War II. Between 1933 and 1945, the Nazi government of Germany, believing that people who were Jewish were not human and didn't deserve to live, basically tried to kill as many as they could and killed a little bit over 6 million people. And they call it the Holocaust. Okay, the Holocaust basically influences the creation of the modern state of Israel. So before 1948, the area that is Israel and Palestine was actually part of the British Empire, and it was called Palestine. It was a colony. After World War II, many Jews, the ones that survived the Holocaust and around the world, felt the only way they would ever truly be safe is they had their own country. And so they began this idea of Zionism, that the area that is, today Israel, that was the land promised to Abraham, and they are the descendants of Abraham. And so there was this idea of Jews moving back to Palestine to form their own state, and Zionism was that belief. But the issue with that, the Jewish diaspora, was that there were already people living there. And when the British Empire said in 1948 that we are going to leave, the question was who was going to run the country. There was a actual war of independence, and the Jewish population won, and that is the beginning of the source of the Arab-Israeli conflict, which is something that we can get to in a different chapter. But for now, that's the beginning of it. But one of the things that happens is Jews around the world in countries like the United States and England, where they weren't facing as much discrimination, had a lot more ability to actually help fund the beginning of Israel and lobby their governments. And so the idea of the Israeli lobby. In the United States, there are groups that favor us being close allies with Israel, and they help influence American policy. Christianity. Christianity begins as an offshoot of Judaism, and the difference with this was Christianity was an expansionist religion. And so once Christianity was established, one of the things that differed from Judaism, besides the belief in the divinity of Jesus Christ, was that it saw its mission as to spread the word, and it welcomed anybody into it. In other words, to be a Christian, your faith in Christianity, not your ethnicity, was important. In Judaism, it was more that you were Hebrew. But here it was more about belief. So anybody can be Christian, right? So it begins as this tiny little sect. It eventually grows through trade routes as people start talking to each other, and it gains in more influence. And the fact that it was allowed anybody to join it let it grow. And so eventually, by the year 333 AD, 300 years later, it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And as Europe grew, Christianity grew. And as Europe began to control the world, so did Christianity. So the Spanish come to the Americas, and with them comes Catholicism. So most of South America is Catholic due to the European colonial expansion. Now, that's not to say this went without a hitch. And some places did resist. Not every place resisted. Many parts of Africa were colonies of Europe, but yet the majority of the inhabitants did not convert to Christianity. And in Asia, it did not take the place of Hinduism or Buddhism. Some places it blends. So if you look at Christianity in Mexico, it's a lot different than Christianity, say, in Italy is. It incorporates many more of the Native American beliefs. So a lot of the artwork and iconography that you see in Mexican Catholic churches is more reflective of Native American work than it is of European work. Islam is also a universalist religion in that it sees anybody can become Muslim. You don't have to be from Saudi Arabia or Somalia or Pakistan. You just have to believe in the 5 pillars. And this begins with Muhammad. And Muhammad was a gentleman who is in the Islamic faith, hears the word of God, and God commands him to take it down, which becomes the Quran, or their holy book, and is written in Arabic. Islam originally spreads through conquest. The area that is Saudi Arabia today, where Mecca is where Islam begins. And as the people who are Muslim become more powerful, they conquer their neighbors, and they grow and grow. And as Islamic forces conquer a country, residents were usually given a choice to convert and become Islamic or not. And sometimes, if they didn't convert, they were persecuted or executed, so convert or the sword. And many times they were just allowed to go on their lives, but if they weren't is Muslim, they were taxed at a higher rate and could not be in positions of power. In the Islamic view, there really is very little difference between religion and politics. So many countries, many cities in the Islamic world, the most important religious buildings and structures are also political structures. And a good example of this would be Iran. So Iran is technically the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it has elected leaders, but it also has religious leaders as well who form the government. And there's less of this idea of separation of church and state that we have than in many Islamic countries. That isn't to say that there aren't some countries that have that, but generally speaking, there's a greater connection. And again, just like Christianity, as Islam moved away from its central core, as it encountered other areas, it took on local traditions. Now, there are variations in religious belief, not only between religions, but inside religions. And so the scale can vary in regional variation. And a good example is the Sunni Shia split in the Middle East. So just like you can be Catholic or Protestant, in Islam you can be Sunni or Shia. And they're both Muslim. They both are Islamic. They both believe in the same idea of Muhammad as the prophet and the Quran being the holy word. So they bear that and many of the same beliefs. But where they do divide is on what should happen after Muhammad dies. In other words, who would be the next prophet? Muhammad was the prophet and the founder of Islam. When he died, some believe that the next leader should be somebody who shared his blood, a relative, like a nephew, since he had no sons of his own. There were some who believed that whoever was the most capable leader or general should be the next leader. And that was the basis of the split. And so Sunni Islam is the majority. Most people who are Muslim are Sunni, and they believe that the next prophet should be somebody who was the most capable, not necessarily related to Muhammad. And that's what Shias are. Shias are believing in that. So the majority of people in the Middle East are Sunni, but Shia, or Shiites as they're called, are found concentrated in these pockets. So here's this map. All these countries that are green are majority Islamic. Most of the people are Muslim. And if you look at the right here, most of the people are Sunni, the vast majority. But you see Shia. Shiites form the majority of population in Iran. There's a large portion in Lebanon and a large pocket here in Yemen. And what's interesting is right now, for instance, there is a civil war going on in Yemen. And part of that civil war focuses on which religious group will have the power, the Sunnis or the Shiites. And so Saudi Arabia is a majority Sunni country. They are giving aid and material and help to the Sunnis in Yemen, and Iran is giving aid to the Shias. And it's kind of, in a sense, Iran and Saudi Arabia are fighting each other through Yemen. In the USA, there are distinct regional groups of religion, and these can reflect historical patterns. So, for instance, Mormons are Christian, but they are only primarily dominant in Utah. There are Mormons all over the country, but the only place you find Mormons being the majority are in Utah, and that is because as the Mormon sect of Christianity rose in the 1830s and 40s, in many places they were discriminated against. People feared them. They thought they were outlandish or crazy or wrong. In fact, the first leader of the Mormon church, Joseph Smith, was actually killed by a mob. So they did not feel safe many places. They were driven out, and they eventually moved out to Utah in the 1840s, which at the time of the 1840s wasn't even part of the United States. It was still part of Mexico. But the idea was they could live here far from anyone else without being persecuted. Unfortunately for them, The United States caught up to them, but by then we weren't quite so harsh. If you look at the South, most of the people of the South, so this is Tennessee, Georgia, Atlanta, the Deep South, are Baptists. And they call it the Bible Belt because the Baptists are very conservative Christian. But that's because the people that settled that, the very first European colonists, were Baptists. They came from that area and they settled it out. If you go to the Midwest, like Minnesota and Wisconsin, and even here in Illinois, you see a lot of Lutherans because the main people that came here from Europe in the 1850s were from Germany or Norway. We also see a lot of Catholicism. Catholicism is actually one of the fastest growing sections of Christianity in the United States, in main part because the Hispanic population in this country is predominantly Catholic, and the Hispanic population is one of the fastest growing. Most immigrants to this country are either Asian or Hispanic, and that's part of it, and Hispanic families tend to have more children at this point than non-Hispanic families. So we're seeing Catholicism also grow as well. This map shows the dominant religion by county in the United States. So each county is color coded. So in these counties, more people are Baptist than any other religion. And you can see the mix. So you can see Chicago is Catholic. Now, that doesn't mean that most people are Catholic. It just means of all the people that are religious, most of them are Catholic. So that could mean that 35% are Catholic and 20% are Baptist and 20% are Lutheran. It just says that that's the highest amount. But this is the center of the Mormon population that we talked about in Utah. Here's the Bible Belt right here. Here's the Lutherans that we see. And these reflect all those patterns we talked about. Now, one thing those maps hide are differences in devotion at local and regional levels. So you can show a map of the Middle East and see that many countries are predominantly Sunni. But devotion, how much is the religion practiced in public? And that can vary. In some parts of the Middle East, you wouldn't know, other than the signs being in Arabic, that you were in any other city. You wouldn't know that the people were Muslim. People aren't wearing what we perceive as Muslim gear. The women are not wearing, they're not wearing veils. It could look like a Western city. Turkey is a predominantly Muslim country, but yet religious belief is not publicly expressed as strongly. But if you go to Lebanon or Syria, it's a much different situation. Religious belief is much more dominant. In some countries, women are required to wear religious mandated coverings. Or you could look at Europe. If you look at a map of Europe, it lists most of the countries as Christian, but yet in European culture, Christianity is actually not being practiced as much, and most people think that religion is something that is kept private, not public. So the place of religion influences this to wider politics. How predominant is religion in everyday life? So if you are in an area where religion is very predominant, then let's take an example of the South. The southern part of the United States, right? Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Atlanta, is the Bible Belt. And in that area, religion is a very strong part of social life. Everyone goes to church on a Sunday. It's a much more conservative area. And so therefore, for politicians, you're also usually very conservative, and most of the politicians tend to be conservative Republicans because the conservative religious life bleeds into the conservative political life, right? So religion in the urban public space has that connection. If religion is seen as a deeper part of society, you see a bigger use of religion in public spaces. But if it's not, you see less of it, okay? And what we do find across the board around the world is that as societies modernize and become more urban, religion kind of fades from being a very strong public belief to a more personal and private belief. So let's talk about the United States. For many years, every little city would put up at Christmas time a display of the manger. Jesus Christ in the manger with his parents and the three wise men. And they would have those on the village square, and they put up Christmas trees or crosses. But as the United States has grown more modern and more urban, there are many who do not hold Christian beliefs and felt or just did not want the government to be involved in religion, and so they started trying to fight this. So for a long time, Daley's Plaza in Chicago, right, 2 blocks from our school, where they have the big Picasso sculpture, they would have a big, huge, Christmas display every year, until the American Atheist Society said, we are a country where religion does not get official government recognition, so why are they putting it here? And actually, part of the settlement was that they could still put that there, but the American Atheists could also put their booth there as well. Okay, so urban spaces still have sacred sites or public displays, but it does decrease. How does religion interact with the environment? Well, environmental change is a major part. The Christian tradition says that God has made man the steward of earth to watch over all the animals. A lot of religions have that similar theme in a way. There are stories about that. Okay, good example is the Great Flood. The Great Flood is a religious story that is used to explain the environmental actions of the flood, right? But it's also a unique thing. There's been this new theory that kind of ties us in. If you don't have science and knowledge to explain the environment, you can turn to religion, and religion can be used to explain things in myth. So, the Great Flood goes back to this modern day thing. We think we found there actually was a real Great Flood. These scientists discovered this. The Black Sea right here is connected to the Mediterranean Sea by a very narrow strait, not even a mile across. But 6,000 years ago, it was cut off. This was dry. And the reason was this. During the last ice age, so much water from the oceans was frozen in ice, the oceans were lower. And so this Mediterranean Sea was about maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 feet lower, which basically dried up this river. So this area got stuck, got dry. And the Black Sea was cut off from the Mediterranean Sea. Well, why is that an issue? The Black Sea gets less water from its rivers than here. And so what happens is, if this is blocked off and no more water can come from the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, over time, this actually shrank. It got lower. So the water here was a good maybe 300-400 feet shallower than here. And in fact, if we look at maps, this is the current coastline. But about 6,000 years ago, this was the coastline because the water was shallower. So all this was open land. And this was about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. This was the beginning of agriculture. There were a lot of people here and farming. Very, very fertile, good place to grow crops. But 6,000 years ago, it flooded. I'll come back to that. And what happens is this. Let me go back to that map. As the glaciers melted, the sea levels rose, and the Mediterranean Sea got deeper and deeper, and the water rose, and eventually broke over this bridge like a waterfall and started to fill the Black Sea. Now this was a lot of water, and the water in the Black Sea went from about 400 feet below what it is today to today, so it raised about 400 feet in less than a year, maybe less than 6 months. That means that the water was coming up maybe a foot an hour. So think about that. You're a farmer, and the ocean next to you is getting deeper by about a foot an hour, and it's getting deeper, and it's covering your farms, and it's not stopping. And you don't have the satellite technology to see all this. You just see this, so you interpret that as an act of God. And what we also notice is that when that flood happened 6,000 years ago, we also see evidence of people moving, dispersing by different types of pottery and languages. And something happened here 6,000 years ago that all these different types of cultures moved. And so we think it was the flood, which is interesting because then as these people moved, and some of them went into the Middle East, and some of them went into Asia, and some of them went into Europe, they had this, this myth, this story of a flood from God. And why would God do this? Well, maybe some people were bad and God wanted to punish them. Whatever reason they gave it, the religion explained what happened when they didn't have the technology to explain it. And maybe that shared myth later became the story of Noah and the ark. Okay, another thing that happens is that we also see right about this time 6,000 years ago that monotheism becomes more dominant. The rise of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism begins. But with monotheism, you have this idea of this, and it displaces the hunter-gatherers, that earth-based beliefs polytheistic religions, like hunter-gatherer religions where you believe in many different spiritual beliefs, tends to be earth-based. But monotheistic religions, where does God live? Up in heaven, right? In the sky. And at the same time this happens, we see this movement from a sky, earth-based belief to a sky-based belief, right? We move from a static worship where people would get together with ceremonies and take hallucinogenic substances and dance in festivals to a more formalized type of worship where you worship with one person leading a church, like a priest or an imam, right? And the Axle Age says that these things happened, and the rise of major religions happened with it because people were moving from a hunter-gatherer society where everybody was equal to a more authoritative city-state where you had a king or a duke or a knight that was in charge or a priest, and you had that, and these kind of coincided, and that religion evolved with society to explain that religion became more authoritarian and more sky-based to reflect what was happening as more people began to live in cities. Okay. Religion has also been used to justify social hierarchy. In other words, the religion of the elite makes you marked for being special. So, for instance, in the Islamic world, in the large empires, there were large populations in these countries that were not Islamic, many Christian and Jewish populations. But unless they converted, they were never going to be and became Muslim. They were never going to be part of the ruling class. So they can never be leaders of the empire. Another way that religion intersects with geography is the idea of sacred sites. There are some sites that are specific and religious, right? In an animist worldview where everything is sacred, so maybe all of nature is sacred. There might be some places that are more than others, but nothing that is so sacred above all else. But in a universal religion like Christianity or Muslim, one thing that happens is we start separating sacred and profane. And what that means is, in the animist view, right, everything is sacred. This tree, that rock, that river. But in the universal religions, this church is sacred, and inside this church is sacred, but everything else is not. And so that's what they mean by sacred and profane. Some religious sites are shared by many religions, and that can be challenging. So Ground Zero in New York, this is where the Trade Center was, the two towers of 9/11 that came down. And this is as close to in a sense, sacred ground in the United States. It's not holy in a religious sense, but it is very sacred to many people because of the people that died there. And so there's a lot of sensitivity to what goes on in the neighborhoods. And there was a proposal here to build an Islamic center, a mosque. And there was a lot of opposition because many people felt that because the terrorists that did this were Muslim and used religion as their excuse for it, that we shouldn't do that. In fact, they saw it as basically rubbing salt on an open wound, right? What I find interesting is that the argument was this was special ground, it was sacred, right? And that we shouldn't have something so unsacred next to it. But there was already a mosque over here from years back that no one talked about, and then right over here was a strip club. So I guess it depends on, I think that was more about politics than religion. Okay? Another example is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a city that is sacred to all three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And it's a very old city. It actually begins because this is a relatively dry area, and there was an oasis, a spring, water. And so that's how it starts. But over the period of the last 3,000 or 4,000 years, various things have happened that have made this a sacred city to all three religions. In Judaism, it was the capital of the first Jewish state of Israel. This is where God commanded the Hebrews to build their temple. And so the first Jewish temple was here, and that was where God lived on earth, which was later destroyed by the Roman Empire. The Muslim religion, in Islamic tradition, when Muhammad dies, his body, before he dies, he is taken, he flies through the help of God, to Jerusalem, and it's right here on this site that was the former site of the Jewish temple that had been destroyed 600 years before, that God takes him to heaven. So this is where he enters heaven, and there is a mosque there, the Dome of the Rock. So it's very, very sacred to Islamic culture. And in the Christian culture, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre here is where Christ was hung on the cross. And it's that act that defines Christianity. So all three religions see this as a very special place. And there's been many conflicts over that. Okay. As I mentioned before, in the Roman time, in the Roman Empire, with conflicts with the Jews, they destroyed the Temple Mount. In the 1100s, the whole area here was part of the Muslim Empire, and Christian invaders during the Crusades conquered it for about 50 to 100 years. Many massacres. The city has been destroyed and rebuilt many, many times. Today, one of the most common things to talk about the conflict is that um, who actually owns Israel. So there are some that don't. Some countries, like Saudi Arabia, many in Iran, do not believe Israel to be a legitimate government. They see that the creation of Israel was an illegal act, that the people who lived here were forcibly expelled. So there's a constant conflict. Israel says that Jerusalem is their capital, but many countries don't recognize that because the Palestinian areas also claim Jerusalem as a capital. So there's conflicting claims. And it's very tough to navigate because if your religion says that this is your holy land given to you by God, and another religion says this is your holy land special to you from God, how do you reconcile that? It's not easy. And if I could tell you how to do that, I'd probably have the Nobel Peace Prize. Another way that religions organize space is the idea of a pilgrimage, right? So some sites become special, and people make a special journey, and the journey has spiritual significance, right? To go through this journey, you become closer to God, or you complete something, and usually through the act of physical exertion. So I'm going to show you another video here. This is a video about a pilgrimage to Mecca. Hopefully, this works. Eventually. Oh my goodness. There we go. So let me exit out of that. So the Hajj, one of the largest movements of people, is a religious pilgrimage. Not all pilgrimages are large. but there's definitely a geographical aspect of that. For instance, um, Mecca, as a religious site, has developed many um, tourism aspects. They have to build massive hotels to accommodate the people that come on these trips, large airports and such. Now, this kind of ties back to what we talked about. This is actually that Christmas display on Daly Plaza. And again, in the United States, these can often be controversial. In some countries, there is no controversy. So, in fact, if you think about England, right? In England, there is actually an official religion, the Church of England. The Queen is the head of the Church of England. And in the government is the Queen's government. So they do put up Christian displays. They do recognize other religions have the right to do so. But at the same time, here, there's been a lot of controversy. Sometimes governments are ordered to take these down because what if you're not Christian? Should your taxpayers support that? Right? And that global variation is around the world. Religion's worth to oneself. In other words, how much is religion worth to you as a person? In some countries, religion is a very big part of people's lives, and in other countries, not as much. We find that in countries that are more economically advanced, more urban, religion has a smaller role in people's lives. Okay? And every society varies in how they express this publicly and privately. But we have seen that as religion declines, we see secular public places. So a lot of cities have town halls or village squares that are public spaces where people gather for events. So think about when the Chicago Cubs won the World Series, right? We didn't have the parade to go to a church or a cathedral, but they went to Grant Park, a secular public place, if you will. And then they'll get towards the end here. Religion can actually organize itself. So a religion can draw certain boundaries. A good example might be a parish. In the Catholic Church, a parish is the area that a single church serves. So if you go to, say, St. John's Church, then you live in the parish of St. John's. So religions draw that up themselves. The Archbishop of Chicago is in charge of all the parishes in the Chicago area, just like the Archbishop of Detroit and so forth and so forth. So these are lines that aren't necessarily state drawn, but drawn by the church. But a really neat example is eruves. So your book talks about eruves, and Chicago has one. Now an eruv is a spatial organization of a particular part of the Jewish religion. And in this sect of the Jewish religion, it's a very conservative view. One of the commandments is that God says on the day of the Sabbath, you rest. That's one of the 10 commandments. So in that interpretation, that means you can't do any work, which means you literally cannot open doors or get in cars or push elevator buttons. So no work. Well, that makes getting around in life pretty hard. How are you going to open doors? You have to stay in your house all day. Well, how do you go to temple that day if you can't open doors? It's tough. So in order to maintain that religious belief, there evolved this kind of workaround, if you will, the idea of an eruv. So in that religious viewpoint, on the day of the Sabbath, you can't do any work outside the house. So in other words, if you're in your own home, you can open doors, you can lift things, not a big deal. But they expand that, and your home could have a courtyard or a big yard, like a fenced-in yard. So if you went into your fenced-in yard, you're still in your home, so you're okay. So what if your whole neighborhood was fenced in? It'd be one big yard. And that's what an eruv is. It's a neighborhood that is fenced in so that on the day of the Sabbath, you can go outside, you can open doors, you can participate in society. And the way they do that is this symbolic fence. And you can see it right here. This wire passes over the top of this light pole. And that makes it an eruv. Let me show you on a map. This one here is, here's Lake Michigan. So here's where Loyola University is. Here's the red line. This is Peterson Avenue. This is the Chicago North Branch channel of the Chicago River Sanitation Canal. This is the yellow line of the L, and this is the Union Pacific North train line. And these form fences. So these fences, right, this is a big, huge raised train line like the L. It's a big, huge raised piece of earth with a train top. That's a fence. The holes that are cut out for the bridges are just like doors in a fence. They function. Right here, this river is a fence. But what about breaks in the fence? How do you accomplish that? So here's an example. This is a bridge over the Chicago River, and this right here would be a break in the river wall of the air roof. So here we have a wire. This post goes down to the river. It's actually right next to the bridge, and then it has a wire strung across the top of it to the next streetlight, which goes back down. So that's kind of like the top of the fence, and this becomes nothing more than a gate in the fence. This right here is Peterson Avenue, and there's the wire right down there. So it's not a real fence, but it's a symbolic fence, and as long as that wire is there, the air roof is intact. Now here's the thing that's interesting. This is city property, the streetlights, but the wire itself, and I'll go back, this is private. So the city of Chicago said, we're not going to pay for the wire, but if you want to use this lamppost, as long as what you're doing doesn't interfere, then we're not going to stop you. So the Jewish community here paid for someone to install that little hook because the wire has to go over the top. It can't be strung from pole to pole, it's go over the top of the pole. And they actually have people whose job it is to drive around all week to keep an eye on those wires. And if anything breaks, they have to fix it. And if it does break, they actually have a web page that tells their people, don't go out, the area was broken. So it's kind of an interesting and neat. Chicago's not alone. There's more than one air roof in Chicago, and they're in New York and Los Angeles and many large American cities and cities around the world. Religious conflict over space. Sometimes the borders of countries are the borders between faith communities. So an example right here would be North and South Sudan. South Sudan is predominantly Christian. North Sudan is predominantly Muslim, and that is the border between them. But the conflict is, what if the border runs between in a country like Nigeria or Sudan? And what I mean by that is, 10 years ago, North and South Sudan were one country. And that actually led to conflict because the people in the South who were Christian felt they were being oppressed by the Muslims in the North, and it led to a civil war. And when they finally settled the war, they actually drew that boundary to reflect that. But in Nigeria, a lot of conflict happens right here along that border. Okay? So if they share the same national space, sometimes it doesn't work out and there's actually a civil war. Okay? And that can even happen within faiths. So Ireland is Christian, but most of Ireland is Catholic Christian. The very far northern tip, called Northern Ireland, there were many people who were Protestant, so Christian but not Catholic. And this goes back to a previous British Empire settlement. When Ireland became independent in the 1920s, the majority of the country was Catholic. The people that lived here, majority Protestant, did not want to leave. They did not want to become part of Ireland. They wanted to stay part of England. And so they actually put a boundary right here, which has led to some issues. And one of the issues was many people here wanted to be part of Ireland. And also many Catholics were denied the equal rights of the Protestants. They were given less paying jobs, had to live in worse neighborhoods. So there was discrimination as well. And there was basically armed civil war for many years. They called it the Troubles. Between roughly the 1960s, Catholics and their supporters fought the English Protestants here for control. And the differences here, it was primarily different branches of Catholicism versus Protestantism, both Christianity, right? But that was also seen as an ethnic marker in a sense. Okay, so religion in society, on that note, is often used as a marker of identity, right? You see someone who is Hindu, and oftentimes they often are Indian as well, or you see them or perceive them as such, right? And so, in other words, religion becomes intertwined with other social aspects. You know, we talked about nationalism before, right? So religion as a national identity. The idea of being Arab and being Muslim, for many Americans, seems to be one and the same. But you can be Arab and be Christian. You can be Arab and be Jewish, right? Being Arab has more to do in many ways with the language you speak and the country that you lived in. Now, in a lot of those countries, Islam is the majority religion, but not the only religion. And with that, you have conflict. Okay? With increased globalization, religion is seen as part of a culture. So, in our society, even though not everyone is Christian, we celebrate Christmas. Many people who aren't Christian celebrate Christmas, and if they don't in this country, they're very much aware of it. Christianity is part of the bigger culture, right? What's interesting, though, as globalization has made people more exposed to other religions, and as economic advancement has lessened the role of religion, we see this also rise of religious diversity and the acceptance of it, but also fundamentalism, which is just a belief in one religion as a fundamental and sole religion, kind of a conservative liberal belief, right? And that we also see the many movements of people and ideas and religions have diffused and moved all around the world. And what happens is, as religions move, either voluntarily or not, through diasporas, when the Jews moved from the Middle East in the 100 years after the Roman Empire destroyed it, they became part of other cultures and incorporated part of that, and identities changed because of it. Another aspect is the social difference of gender. Gender and the roles that women play or men play can definitely have a religious aspect, and religion can determine that. One of the biggest arguments in our country is women and their role in the church and their role in reproductive health. So, in a lot of conservative religions, the woman's choice and woman's role of being the mother and the homemaker is very much a religious aspect of it. Okay, a lot of the monotheistic religions have a strong patriarchal background, and so gender is very much enforced. Okay, when religion has also been a force for change, witness to power. Um, in the 1970s, when much of Eastern Europe was communist and controlled in large part by the Soviet Union, many local Catholics in Poland, the only way to really express discontent was to go to church and talk about the power of Catholicism, which in communist societies, Catholicism was not viewed very highly. But religion said that we should be free to practice the way we preach. So religion can reinforce power. It can keep things the way they are, but it can also be used as a kind of resistance in a way. So we made it through our first chapter. I know this is a long slog video. I'm willing to make these shorter by breaking them up into maybe smaller segments so you can watch them one at a time. So I'm going to ask you all this week to kind of think about that. And on the discussion page for next week, I'll put a little discussion page about that. Would you prefer 4 or 5 10-minute videos, or 2 or 3 20-minute videos, or one long slog? So we'll see what happens. But anyway, hope this works. Between this, your chapter summary notes, the PowerPoints, we'll see how your quizzes go. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, email me. Post notes on the discussion board so I can see what's going on. And thank you very much, and have a good night.